Right.
Hi, everybody. And everybody is Tim Davis and Chris Senior out there. And sitting here at the table, we have Rob Hillman from Advisory, Brian Host from Capital Budget. We have Ralph Dormitzer. Ralph, lean in and smile at the camera. There we go. There's Ralph. Also from Capital Budget, we have Michelle Leary from Town Manager's Office, Gene Dipple from the Questa Select Board, and yours truly, Mike Dick. I'm going to now just have Gene open the meeting for us.
Sure. And right now, we are opening the meeting for the long-term financial planning group / Cohasset Financial Future Forum. This is a group that right now has 4 folks present. We don't have the full group here, but we're going to proceed in any event. We have 3 members of Capital Budget, though, so I'm not sure if you would like to open your meeting.
We shall open our meeting. So the time is 7:07. My name is Brian Host, and I will start a roll call vote. Ralph?
Present.
That's Ralph Dormitzer, present.
Mike Dick, present.
Brian Host, present. Susan Franklin? Not present. Francine Lyons? Not present. Okay, so Ralph's an associate member, but if we don't have a quorum with the seating members, then he counts as a member for a quorum. We have a quorum. It doesn't change the agenda in any way, but we posted this as a capital budget meeting, just so that we would be in compliance with open meeting law. And with that, I will turn the meeting back over to Ms. Dippold.
So just some housekeeping. First agenda item for the larger group is open meeting law. There were some questions raised about whether this working group is subject to open meeting law. So just to go back in time and give people some background, long-term financial planning is a goal of the select board. The select board on July 12th discussed how best to constitute this group. And when I say this group, I meant a group to help further the long-term financial planning. There was a suggestion by Selectman Evans that we have the chair and vice chairs of advisory, capital budget, select board, schools, the water and sewer commissioners meet informally. And following that recommendation, I did make a motion in order to constitute that group with the goals of trying to figure out what a process should be for long-term financial planning, as well as goals that we should strive towards, and ultimately a recommendation for the select board on how we wanted to proceed there. Following that, fast forward to last week's meeting, Selectman Evans raised concerns that this group was not complying with the open meeting law. And so we asked council to look into that. As a result, we have gotten an opinion from council, ultimately concluding that this group has been complying with open meeting law. Specifically, while we are a working group and thus a public body for purposes of open meeting law, and we do not need a committee or formal charge in order to proceed, because we have been posting, like we posted for this meeting and for the last one, we have been meeting in a public location, and we are open to members of the public who wish to attend, and still are, and we have some members of the public on the line right now. We have been complying with open meeting law, and we will continue to do so. We have not been meeting, and I'm sure my other members can confirm, we have not been meeting behind closed doors. Our meetings have been public, and we will adhere to open meeting law, including over email. And just a reminder for the public, we have been attempting to post not only detailed agendas to keep the public abreast of what we're doing, but also under the select board's website, we have a subpage for select board goals FY23, where we're trying to post a lot of the background information that the group has access to as well for those interested in following along. So with that, I guess I'll stop and pause. Questions, anyone?
Any questions from the people out there? None, okay.
I'm looking at sorry. Mike.
Yep.
I'm looking at- I just printed off the KP opinion this afternoon, and so we're a subcommittee, or working group. It appears to say we are subject to the open meeting law, but we don't need to be charged as a group.
Yes.
So what is it that we have to do? We need to post meetings? Do we need to keep minutes? Do we need to have
Yep.
quorum?
We need to post minutes. We need to keep, we need to post agendas 48 hours in advance. We need to hold those meetings in a public forum. And the quorum is a great question, Rob, because the question is whether we have enough people right now for a quorum of this public body. Certainly Capitol does, and you have an open meeting right now. But where we have a working group without all of the members or a quorum of members arguably present, we were going back and forth, frankly, about maybe we're just attending Capitol's meeting right now at this point. So, Ralph, I saw you wanting to interject.
That might be the safe harbor.
Well, the only thing I say is that if you look at our own handbook for committees, we've got one, right? I think the thing is that this has to be an advisory committee to somebody, and that's the only thing you really have to do. So say, we're advisory to the capital, but are you, this group is the advisory to the capital budget committee, is sort of an important thing to say. Otherwise, you come under some other strict rules if you think you're a standalone committee.
Yes.
That's all you have to worry about. It's your advisory,
Right,
and to somebody.
that makes sense to me.
Well, council's opined that we're a subcommittee. They didn't say what we're a subcommittee of,
Of the select board,
okay?
of the select board.
But so that's, I guess, what we are. Now, I don't want to waste too much time on this. I just want to have a firmer grasp on who, it's kind of the philosophical question, who we are. So, okay, go ahead.
I just make a philosophical comment. Because I feel like, unfortunately, we're getting, bogged down trying to, force a definition on what we're doing. What we're doing is trying to get the committees to talk to each other.
Yeah,
Right.
no,
I
absolutely.
don't, I don't feel like, ultimately the lawyers are going to opine, but this isn't meant to be a committee. It's not meant to be a subcommittee. It's meant to be a forum where people from different committees can form a can gather a common baseline of information from which we can have intelligent conversations with each other.
Yeah, I completely agree. Don't misinterpret.
Yeah.
If I was
No, you
unclear, and I may have been, that I thought that this needed an ounce more formality than we currently have. I just want to be satisfied that I'm not actively breaching
Breaching a law.
On
Yeah.
TV,
Yeah.
while sitting here would be bad
Agreed.
look for me. So it's,
No, I think we're all on the same page. We're all sensitive to following the law, but the reality is that I think we're just trying to have a conversation in an open forum and follow the rules.
Yeah.
So that we can have our conversation.
Yeah, let's do it.
It's,
Well, and I think,
that's the intent.
I think the safest right now, Rob, if you agree, is we are attending your meeting because we don't have a
Okay.
full session
Okay.
of the other group.
Some notion of like what a quorum looks like for our group, but we're not going to have that tonight.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, I'm not even sure there's a legal definition for a quorum
For a working group.
for that working group.
Well,
because
we have some legal cover here,
Yeah.
courtesy of
Yeah.
Brian and
Because you posted.
Well, we posted that we were attending the long-term financial planning group meeting.
This is like a terrible circle
So
of the
I'm not,
office.
I'm not sure it's going to give as much cover as one might like.
Well, we're not gonna vote on anything.
No,
In-
but we're not going to make any decisions on anything.
Yeah, so
All we're doing is identifying
Yeah.
information that at some point we need to gather.
Yeah.
we can gather it in part in this meeting, but no one's going to make any decisions or deliberate anything, I don't believe today. So why don't we
Yeah.
proceed, provided everyone's comfortable?
I'd like to suggest that we review our need, our purpose, and then we can go through our agenda. And that's really for the benefit of Ralph and for Tim Davis, who ought to be given the courtesy of why are we here? What are we trying to do? Rather than just throw you into the middle of a discussion.
I did try to look at what you did
Yeah.
last week online, and also the select board. So I have some sense of it. So you don't
Right.
need to do too much for me. Just proceed as if I had been here.
Do you have, pardon me, do you have access to the OneDrive file for this? Can we get him access? Is there any reason we couldn't get him access?
No, so what we're gonna do is upload everything that's on the OneDrive into one spot on the website, so everyone will have access. So yes, I'm happy to get you access.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Justin, if you can put up that first PowerPoint.
I'll load into a folder. All of this conversation.
I'd like to just go through this in just 2 or 3 minutes.
Thanks.
And Ralph, I apologize, I didn't email this to you, but I will. And I'll email it to the entire CBC. Thanks. Okay. Yes, this is the one. And on the first slide, let's just talk about the need. Capital budget and advisory and select board all agree on these needs. We've covered that in our first meeting, but just for your benefit, Ralph, and for Tim's benefit, our town has has proposals for new or upgraded, I use the term purpose-built buildings, but beyond purpose-built. We have needs for new or upgraded buildings. We have a critical need for annual maintenance and upkeep for our existing infrastructure. We have a need to review our existing operational funding formulas and a need to make changes to meet new realities. And this most important point was not in our last meeting's deck, but we have a need to maintain our AAA bond rating indefinitely. Next slide, please. So here's what our purpose is. We want to provide the town with tools and methods to reliably and consistently gauge what we're calling generational proposals for infrastructure that have a 30-year lifespan. That's, I'll say it's arbitrary, but it seems everyone was comfortable with that. And we also want to gauge our 5- and 10-year operational plans and funding formulas to make sure that they really do support our future. We want to prepare the ground for the select board and the town manager to assess and prepare major financial warrant articles. So rather than the town manager and the select board operating in a vacuum, we're going to provide some foundational structure and guidelines for them to work with, because we are a cross-functional group. We have representatives from all the major players. And if we can come to consensus as a cross-functional, collaborative and collegial group, then we feel we are providing the town with a benefit. And then finally, create a stakeholder-derived, consensus-based funding model based on need, cost, and financial feasibility. And that's really the summation of what we're trying to do. Next slide, please. So our working group, these are, think of them as ground rules or what we agree to as a working unit, as citizens of the town and as collaborators. We represent the interests of Cohasset citizens and taxpayers. We're going to provide a starting point for conversations that will assess our financial sustainability, and that's an important word. Provide a forum for all our stakeholders who would be affected by major financial decisions that the town will make in the future, and contribute our own information, our thoughts and ideas in an open and honest discussion. And we're going to seek areas of common interest first. We're not going to look at things that we are adversarial on. We want to find things that we agree to. And we want to move fast. we want to stay focused, and we want to seek consensus. And next slide, please. That should be the agenda. So here's the agenda for tonight. So let me just ask Ralph, let me ask Tim Davis, if he's with us, if they have any questions or any comments.
Well, the only thing I can say is, having looked at what you have done already, I think you did a good job. I think it was very helpful. I thought it was very good comments. So at this point, there are very few things I would add. There are a few things I would add, but I won't do that right now unless you want me to say what else I would have done, unless you're interested. And what we had done in the past, because this is a repeat, the third repeat for me of this.
Right.
So.
True enough.
Yeah.
Any other comments?
We have no hands up.
Okay.
We have no thumbs up, so.
Okay, fine. Keep going. So Ralph, yes, what would you add?
Okay, you would emphasize transparency. I would double emphasize transparency. I do think that's critical. You've already said it in your previous meeting. I think you ought to take that up as very serious. I think there's a real lack of information out there, and a lot of people really don't know what to expect going forward. And town meeting is not the place to find it all out. I think you've all said that once, and I think you said it in the last meeting. So that was great.
Right.
I think when we tried to do it previously, we would benchmark what other towns were spending against various categories. And benchmarking took us back to looking at other towns like ourselves, and we were saying, how are we doing for, whether it's schools or public safety or whatever. Benchmarking should be, I think, a piece of this. I don't know if you want to do that, but it helps a lot in saying, if you're talking about efficiency, you're talking about that, how do you know whether you're efficient? And you benchmark. So that unfortunately runs right up against this move fast. So I'm warning you that if you go after benchmarking and someone does a serious study, this takes time. It doesn't go easy, and people have to actually translate various people's ways of doing budgets so that you actually have a consistency across various towns. It's hard to do. The only other thing I would add to you, the thinking broadly about future projects which you're going to discuss and what shortfalls. One of the ways to actually deal with uncertainty is talk about confidence levels, okay? That you talk about whether or not this project is there a high confidence level this is really going to happen, or is it not going to happen? So I'll stop right there. But anyway, there are just some thoughts about the way I would look at this thing, okay?
So let me just tell you what I've captured. Transparency is critical. We will or should be addressing gaps in information for the public. We've used benchmarking in the past, helpful as a guide, may run counter to moving fast. Addressing uncertainties can be addressed by using confidence levels as a guide. Okay.
Transparency for just a moment. I know it's a word that's used frequently and it's important. But I know we've discussed in the past that really the change in the way that the local papers cover our meetings, or should I say no longer cover our meetings, has really left our constituents without anywhere to see what's happening at the various meetings, particularly with regards to the big projects, which typically would be newsworthy.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, transparency is incredibly important, generally speaking, but there's a specific issue now today in Cohasset that didn't exist a couple of years ago. And you've articulated this many times. I'm just repeating what I've heard from Ralph, and he's right, frankly. We have a very severe issue here in Cohasset because we don't have actually an active reporter covering our meetings and disseminating to the townspeople what's happening. So we may need to think not just about sort of meeting the legal requirements of transparency, but thinking about how can we proactively put information, in a place where people will see it. And I'm going to stop there. I don't even want to go down the path of making suggestions, but there may need to be something more proactive than just following the rules.
You and I had that conversation as well.
Okay, I think,
I think it's a crisis,
yeah,
and I don't think that putting things, on, just, I'm with you, let's not try and solve the problem right this minute, but I sometimes look at how many views the advisory committee gets on YouTube.
right,
Haven't broken 2 digits yet,
Yeah.
so that's not a meaningful avenue of
Right.
public communication,
right,
nor is it
Yeah.
reasonable or even perhaps sane to expect all the citizens of Cohasset to watch 3 and 4 hour meetings. As fun as they often are for those who sort of participate. So you're right, that's a big problem. And then you get to the floor town meeting and no one's been reliably informed.
right.
Let me turn then to Michelle, who's representing Town Manager's Office. And we have Justin Schreier here, our Communications Director. Are there plans, or are there, well, what are your thoughts on using Town Manager's Office at this point anyway, or the Select Board's,
Well, I can weigh in here.
okay,
Let me say,
power
Michelle.
to reach people?
Yeah, so just by way of background, this is something that the select board discussed last year, and was one of our goals in terms of communications, recognizing there was this communication gap.
Right.
We probably didn't, frankly, get it up off the ground enough. But Justin, who came, I think in April, Justin, if I recall correctly, is a key part of trying to do this. And when I say this, what I specifically mean is, I mean, we're going to have to teach ourselves how to do it, right? And a part of what we're doing, for example, right now with the zoning bylaw reforms that we're trying to do is we're saying, we want a communications plan. We need, for example, outbound communications in all different channels. Yep, I see Chris, in all different channels, including, for example, mailing, online, social media, other ways that because different people get different information in different ways. And so I'm just putting that out there as food for thought, not making a specific recommendation here, but that is something that the select board has discussed. Once we feel like we have some sense of where we want to go to help inform town staff on what that plan is. Our select board goals are that we do communications campaign for our other goals, right? And this is one of our goals. And so we're prepared to devote the resources. We just have to very specifically figure out sort of where this group, I think, is starting to go and how we want to use those resources effectively, if that makes sense.
Well, just one quick addition to that, not to belabor the topic, but I think the issue that Brian has identified and other people have identified is it runs a good deal deeper than that. And that is how, no matter how many resources you bring to bear to it, how do you, in the absence of paper general circulation that people, most informed people in Cohasset would generally read, even if they didn't agree with it all the time.
Right.
What's the substitute for that? Fascinated to hear what the answer or answers, if any, to that are. It's not for us to decide today. That's Justin's problem. Sorry.
Welcome to our meeting.
I do see Chris on. I don't know if he had a thing you wanted to weigh in.
Hi, Chris.
Hello, everybody. The reality is that the way people communicate with each other has changed. Right? I mean, I was a journalism major. I am a journalism major. Right? The papers and the concepts and the channels that existed 30 years ago, they're totally changed. It was still TV, right? But the internet didn't exist, and now it does. And traditional newspapers, I don't read physical newspapers. I read 3 or 4 of them every day, but they're all electronic. So what we've done, and again, we won't belabor this tonight because we're not going to fix any of this tonight, is the select board said, hey, we got to do something. We talked about it. We actually have the first full-time person. What Justin does is communicate, right? And what he's been doing is everything from flyers that we've distributed on things to Facebook Lives, to going out to the community. We've done stuff on 143 TV. And I think the zoning stuff, which she just referenced, will be a very interesting way of I think, seeing what people want, how people want to interact on these things. I mean, I took part in a program pre-COVID on how communities engage. one of the nice things about a small town is people talk to each other. So that's one of the things that has to happen here, right? People have to run into each other at the store and on the soccer fields and at church and wherever people interact. And that's how people get a lot of information. And then we'll continue to use other ways. I think we'll try. I think this fall's gonna be exciting because we're gonna, the thing that's teed up, I think first will be the zoning conversation. And we're gonna see how people react. And I'd love any input any of you have about ways to reach people. Now I remember one group telling me in another state that they put out food. That's how they got people. They wanted
what?
public engagement, they put out food. That was pre-COVID.
Oh, okay.
And but that still works. That can still be effective. But you know, we can't feed everybody. So, but the fact is, there's no one way anymore. Unfortunately, that paper of general record, they don't exist. There's nothing like it anymore. And so it requires us to work a lot harder, I think, to get people where they are. And we're not going to get to everybody. We never are. We just have to, I think, make it available and tell people where it is. And hopefully, you know, some of the people that watch the 4-hour meeting, some people want the 4 bullet points. Some people want us to just a 30-second snappy videos. We'll see how it works.
I think this is a great conversation, but it's outside the scope of what we're doing, but it's an important outcome of our conversation, and it's in our minutes. And I'll turn it back over actually to the town manager, assistant town manager, and the select board to add this working group to the list of items along with the zoning bylaw work, add the work of the financial future planning committee working group to reach the citizens of Cohasset, where they are and how they want to receive it. Just listening to what you had to say, Chris. Any other raised hands, comments coming in?
Nope.
Okay, I want to stay on top of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Yep, there's, no one right now.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ralph, do you have something?
Well, the only thing I'd say, and I don't want to get into the discussion, but broadly, there are two things that you really have to have. For people to actually want to see it, it has to be efficient, right? That means you're not going to spend a lot of time, you know, listening to an hour's worth of conversations we're doing now. They're going to have to see it quickly. Second, it's going to take writing skills. I know it's a visual medium that people want to use, but writing skills are critical for this. It should go out as a bulletin of some sort. If it's it can be online and it can be actually hard copy, but you have to have writing skills. It means that people actually writing up what's happened in an efficient manner, so people can read it quickly and understand what's going on. And then I should stop, because then I can really get into what I would do for detail. But that's enough.
Yeah, just to echo what Ralph said, when I was running for the select board, I did learn the hard way about how to communicate with people or not. And I did little videos on how municipal finance works on my campaign website. And then I did one-pagers, because you can see on Facebook when people, how long they'll listen to you. And the average is 30 seconds. FYI, as we move
30
forward.
seconds.
30
Okay.
seconds.
Town government by TikTok.
Yeah, exactly.
That's our
Right.
future.
You did short videos on financial topics, and what was the other thing?
And one-pagers on like what a debt exclusion is and the tax levy and
Right.
things like that.
Oh, short videos and one-pagers and print and public and one-pager content.
Along the lines of what Ralph was saying,
Yeah.
short bulletin on educational content.
Right. Okay. All right. All right. If you could put the PowerPoint back up, Justin, and flip to the agenda. I distilled what was on the posted agenda into just a one-pager that we could just sort of look at. And certainly leave Chris promoted.
So he is promoted, but unfortunately I can't share my screen and have him up at the same time. I can't have the agenda up.
Okay.
So whichever you like up, I'm happy to, do that.
Let's put
You don't need to see me. You can please put up the agenda.
okay. Just Chris, I know you'll speak up, but, jump in anytime. Okay, and if you can enlarge, please. Here we go. And can you zoom in some on that? Because
So unfortunately, I'm not able to zoom in,
okay,
the way that it's configured, since it is a PowerPoint presentation.
all right. So next time I'll split into 2 slides, but we have 3 major areas that we wanted to cover on our agenda tonight. I was hoping that we'd get, buy-in on our problem statements, buy-in on how we're going to proceed with gathering facts, and then finally, agreement on some next steps with some target dates of the select board meeting on the 23rd of August. That's a week plus, week and a day.
Next Tuesday.
And then also looking at year end 2022 for accomplishing some of the deliverables that we'd like this working group to accomplish. So moving into our problem statements. These are statements that we've gathered and I'm bringing to this table and generate discussion and hopefully come to agreement that, yeah, this is what we're focused on. Okay, these are the problems. So we have underfunded ongoing capital needs, which I'm thinking here in the operational budget, there is in particular maintenance for both buildings and roads, which are underfunded, and we know they are. They've been identified by both capital budget and advisory as being underfunded. Next are the foreseeable generational projects over the next 5 to 10 years. How do we pick and choose what gets funded? With those generational projects, what budget shortfalls do we have in the next 5 years? And actually, I'm going to back up on shortfall. We also have shortfalls that arise out of our funding formulas, particularly in capital budget, on what capital budget committee can provide to the town when it comes to using our capital budget stabilization funds, the annual handout of 1.9 to 2.2 million, and how that is underfunded and how that puts capital budget in a difficult position year in and year out of having to choose purchases within the capital budget purview for all the different town departments plus the schools. So that's underfunded too. We need consensus criteria to prioritize projects and major purchases. So advisory has their method, capital budget has their method, and I don't know if select board actually tries to use criteria. I think select board relies on, at least at the beginning, advisory and capital budget's recommendations. But a problem statement is we don't have a consistent criteria across our different groups. Should we have it? And if so, what should that be?
I guess I would ask, what is capital and advisory's consensus criteria?
Capital budget has a pointing system based on 5 different criteria. And we look at the requests that come in, at least from the town departments, and we try and assign our points to the questions, how the questions are answered on those request forms. And I recall that on advisory, correct me if I'm wrong, Rob, I thought we had a ranking system or a ranking method or a way to apply criteria for prioritizing.
We don't. And I'm not sure that I would want to adopt criteria against future events and future mixes of projects that you can't foresee. And I mean, there are good reasons to have criteria, but you can also make, a series, all point assignment. Like decision tree analysis is kind of aggregating guesses sometimes.
Yeah.
And
Can lead you,
what was that?
it can lead you to the wrong
It
place.
can, sometimes it often doesn't, but my approach to it is, and I think the advisory committee's approach over the last couple of years, and it's been disruptive. I mean, we've had 2 very strange years of dealing with these sorts of things. But it's to look at the mix of product, the mix of projects and requests, and then the available resources, and then make decisions within them, based on the facts, rather than a rubric to put it all into. And I bet we probably come out in the same place as capital budget most of the time. You guys are just more quantitative than we are.
Okay, fair enough.
So just one comment I'd make about, capital budget's approach. It tends to work for what I'd characterize as sort of normal requests. Normal being the stuff that's typical that we would see in any given year. It hasn't been applied to, nor would it necessarily work in the context of generational projects when thrown into the mix with the, with the everyday stuff or the annual stuff. And that's really the core of the problem. We've dealt with generational projects when they're sort of thrust upon us. It's probably the best way to put it. We don't advise, or haven't in the past, advised the select board, when to form a committee to research an issue, to do a schematic, to do a conceptual design, and then the next thing people come back and ask for design funds, right? I mean, it's largely been the generational stuff. It's largely been, whichever group, advocated to form a committee and get started, sort of, got in line, got a place in line, without any real prioritization amongst the various things that need to get done. And I think that's part of exactly what we need to, lay out and ultimately, find some way to address. I mean, we're going to lay it out in this group. It's probably going to be addressed in a more formally structured committee of some sort. But there has to be a way to say, okay, if we're forming a committee, we're fundamentally, sending a plane down the runway, and there needs to be a landing slot at the other end. When this committee's work gets done. Otherwise, we're just wasting money and time.
Advisories, my predecessors have been advocating for something like this for a long time. There's been pieces of it, but the idea of putting everything into sort of, a master list and a big old spreadsheet, and then it's a matter of just adjusting assumptions and whatnot to test for, tax impact or possibility of any given project or outcome. I just by way of a footnote, I don't know whether this is in the right direction or not, so I don't want to hijack the conversation, but I am interested at some point in terms of these problems and fact gathering is there are 351 cities and towns in Massachusetts. We can't be the first one.
Right.
And if Hingham's done this, we can't be the second one who's
Right.
ever done this.
Right.
And, and I know in my profession, I have never once written a document from a blank
From
piece of paper.
scratch. Yeah. Right.
It's never happened.
Right.
Gene would probably agree with that,
Right.
or not. I don't want to
I
impinge on
copy
your
everyone all
practice.
the time.
Yeah, I used to joke with the junior lawyers, this is a release. The first one was written in 1504,
Right.
and it read pretty much just like this.
Right.
Yeah.
But the point is that I really want to make sure, and it's kind of to Ralph's point too, in terms of, it's not as sophisticated as benchmarking the actual data points, which is a really good idea and often done. I know the school committee did it some years ago. But to make sure that we're not inventing the internal combustion engine, or as one of my colleagues, not at work, but around town said, R&D really does stand for rip off and duplicate. So, it's trite to say so, but there's a lot of knowledge out there. And I think part of what we should be doing is learning from what's publicly available.
Agree. But,
or learning what not to do from what's publicly available. So, thank you, I just wanted to throw that out.
no, that is helpful, more than helpful. Where my mind is going is, however we do it, we still need to come up with, I think, my opinion, we need to come up with a way to evaluate these multiple big projects, generational projects, we'll use that term. We need a way to collectively come up with a method that the public can agree with, that these three groups, select board, advisory, capital budget, have come up with a defensible, supportable method that's fair and keeps the town with its AAA bond rating.
So that's, I see your point. It's a neat point. Let's come up with a set of criteria. I hate this word,
Yeah.
but I can't find a synonym. Socialize
Yeah.
that criteria. And then when we apply the criteria, remind all the people who dislike the outcome that they agreed to the criteria, leaving aside whether that argument's going to be effective. This is kind of what I meant 2 minutes ago.
Yeah.
Is that, are there municipalities that we can point to that have adopted that sort of a rubric for decision-making?
Right.
If there are, if we don't know, then we should look. And I would, we should also have a conversation about the role of staff in this. I don't want to give people, I feel really guilty saying this out loud, but, giving hardworking people more work to do.
Yeah.
But we have access to expertise in addition to volunteer knowledge, and we should be using that too. But if there are 5 towns that have implemented what you just said, well, I would really like to see their systems and the critiques of those systems,
Right.
positive and negative. Again, I don't want to hijack the.
Yeah, that's right.
I'll just give you one thought that it arises from the discussions we've had about other large projects. And we end up, as I think it's been said in the previous meeting, with advocacy, but no alternatives. We used to talk a lot about, are there any alternatives? So my own view of a lot of the problems with our ability to actually decide whether we're going to do something in the exact way that the advocacy committee has actually proposed is that there are no alternatives usually. And why aren't there alternatives? They're not alternatives because there is no formal structure for, I don't want to call it adversarial, but at least somewhat different points of view, whether they're financial or operational or whatever. But the lack of that other side is completely missing on most projects now. And so it really is about alternatives so that people discuss different points of view about how things should be done, what should be done, how much should they cost, and so on. But the way we do it now is advocacy groups come forward, they propose, and there really isn't an alternative. And so alternatives are really critical in this kind of discussion of what you might do going forward.
So,
I want to respond to that.
Please.
Yeah, and Ralph's been doing this longer than I have, but I've been around for a bit. I have a little bit of trouble referring to a building committee for building acts as an advocacy group. There's something pejorative in there. I'm sure you didn't mean it that way. And you're right. People who work hard on a problem, come up with a solution, advocate for that solution. I mean, it's natural. It's how people are. The alternatives probably should be a part of the process when that group is assessing the problem, the potential outcomes. But my perception, what really happens, and it's no more valid than yours, is that the resources we have to address problems might be 9 people on the Beechwood Common Improvement Association, just my new hypothetical. And they study the problem and they have meetings, they publicize the meetings, they post the meetings, nobody shows up. They issue findings, nobody reads them, nobody comments.
Correct.
And there is no opposing viewpoint because nobody bothered until you get to the floor town meeting. And then there's this, and I've seen it a bunch of times, and we all have, this, what I find a very negative experience in participatory government, of people throwing up objections well after the time in which those objections would have been capable of being baked into the project or considered. I think it's a failure of town government in a small town. It's not necessarily a personal failure of anyone in Cohasset, but I've seen it, and you have, and all of us have, over and over and over again. You get to town meeting and, well, what about this? Well, how many of the 27 meetings did you attend and articulate that issue? Well, none, but I'm here now. And town meeting structured in a way that that can be persuasive. So I agree with you fundamentally that there is a failure to consider the alternatives, but I think it's from indifference at the stage when that should be happening. But maybe that's just, it's just it's not anything we can solve at this point, but it goes to Brian's point also, that a project gets a group, and then the next thing they're doing is looking for resources for drawings. And here I am, I'm falling right into the linguistic trap of they. But the group that the town charged with this project are moving the project forward. Because there is no alternative. I mean, maybe if there's a norm for capital projects on that line, there should be, built into the process. At this point, there will be a big flat halt, or, it's a little much, but red team it, appoint another committee.
That's correct.
And maybe I want to talk about at some point the
Would you
things that have come up.
just define red team for
Oh, I'm sorry.
record?
Red team is when you take a separate, you have a group making a decision, and you take a completely separate group, and they're the opposition. It's like a war game.
Yeah.
And the idea is that they get the thing and they punch holes in it and make the hardest case. And when you're canonizing a saint, they actually literally appoint somebody to be the devil's advocate,
Right.
to point out why Mother Teresa should be a saint. And that's that person's unfortunate job. They'll burn for it, but that's a red team. I mean, in that case, literally.
All right, so what I'm hearing actually is an idea, a suggestion that goes to the same purpose, which is to vet. And I wanted to say a few interactions ago, that a group like the Town Hall Building Committee, I think, has done a very thorough job of providing alternatives and options. But I also am cautious that perhaps those options, while having been considered and discarded, may not have withstood the scrutiny of something like a red team. So for those of you who might be tuned in from the Town Hall Building Committee, I'm not suggesting, that the work that you're doing is incomplete in any way. I think you've done a very complete job of looking at alternatives. But I think that suggestion for a devil's advocate, a red team, may be an approach. My concern initially was cost-benefit analysis, and maybe that's too simplistic on these massive projects.
It's a piece of it.
Right, but having a group that is looking at all of the assumptions.
And it has to happen early enough in the process to be meaningful. That's,
Right.
2 town hall project iterations ago was the time for that conversation. But with some of these projects looking forward, changing the way we make decisions may be a thing we want to contribute. But again, I feel like I'm taking your orderly conversation and hijacking.
No, but let me just assure you that the conversation should be wide-ranging, and we should all be listening and adopting points of view that we agree with and feel that, yeah, that's thoughtful and well-considered. And I think that's thoughtful and well-considered, so it's.
Well, one thing I noticed, just to weigh in, and I've been trying to figure out how to grapple with this, and I tweaked the zoning bylaw committee charge to maybe begin thinking about this a little bit, is the same dynamic. And I've noticed the select board has a lot of committees, and the committees will go off and do a great job. Town hall building is one example, but there's other examples. And oftentimes it's without relation to cost, how we're going to fund it in the budget, whether this will succeed at the ballot, if it ultimately has to be a debt exclusion, how we will do this. And I will say Tanya for the AEC, she actually does a really good job. She's always coming with projects with at least some straw men there and thoughts about funding, including through grants or other structures. And so she's probably the model of maybe in part where we want to head. But, one thought I started to have was, well, should these committees be charged to a certain amount that they can spend based on what we're discussing, or really hold them to a way of funding, like the town hall building committee's charge was to stay within the tax levy. I think we all know right now, that's just mathematically impossible. And, maybe the select board needs to do, I think they need to do a lot better job of focusing on the goal from a cost standpoint. But, to Rob's point, another thing we could do, just food for thought, is when it comes to the transparency issue and the red team, I don't know if this gets exactly where it needs to go, but I'm just going to throw the idea out there because this is something that the zoning bylaw committee is going to do, which is notice and comment.
That's so federal.
When we do federal regulations, we put the proposal out there for notice and comment to the town. And everyone who wants to weigh in can weigh in with concerns and suggestions, or I like it, I don't like it, you're on the right track. And on the federal level, we get all sorts of different levels of critique. And it's helpful to see where people are, where they're not, are we even doing the thing that the people who support us want us to do? Or what's the opposition that we're going to face? And is there a way to address it and calibrate around it? And it might work better with legal changes than big generational projects, but this is something we're trying to build into the website to have a notice and comment process for some of these bigger proposals. Again, just to get the word out there, to invite people to have a landing pad for feedback to come back into the town and the committee, because it is hard trying to figure out where people's minds are at. And you don't want to have a situation at town meeting where, you learn for the first time that the majority of town meeting has some big concerns. So that's, sort of not exactly red team, but it could elicit the same result as a red team in terms of, hey, I have some initial concerns about, the trajectory of cost, or maybe this isn't what we thought it was going to be, something like that. We could try to think about charging committees now with, and this is what we did with the zoning bylaw, like you will do a notice and comment process as we come out with drafts so people can see them and weigh in, and we can get those ideas and see where it lands.
But if you put out the notice for a comment and no one comments, you're back where you started.
We could be back where we
Right.
started.
At least you have a talking point at town meeting to say, look, it was out there.
It was
We're
out there.
trying.
Right.
The assumption is that those who would comment are knowledgeable.
Yeah,
Right.
that is
That's the
true.
problem. Most people who would comment probably haven't spent enough time on it. You almost do need some dedicated red team who has spent time and is charged with doing it. Now, I'm not arguing you should, but when you comment and you're not knowledgeable, comments don't go too far because they sound uninformed.
I'd be interested in asking the leadership of the Town Hall Building Committee for their views on whether they feel that within their committee, they had a quote-unquote red team questioning decisions that were being made along the way. Actually having a built-in adversary. That's too strong a word, but a built-in group who were questioning assumptions, questioning conclusions, and asking those pointed questions along the way. Or if it just seemed like they were building consensus as they moved along, did they get alternate points of view? Did they get contrary points of view as they moved through the process? and felt that they had done a good job in addressing those contrarians so that they could come back to the town and say, we considered all the different permutations, and at the end of the day, we had contrary points of view, but we addressed them. So Brian, you had your hand raised.
I did. I want to shift away from Town Hall Building Committee for a second, because I think they've been used as perhaps as an example, and they're becoming
I was gonna say the same thing.
a central point in this discussion. I don't think that's necessarily fair to them. I think they were really an example. But more broadly, I think the issue that the reality of these committees, these volunteer committees, is the people who are willing to volunteer their time on one of these committees, by definition, you are in favor of the project. Otherwise, they would not be donating their time, right?
Excellent.
So technically, you have what's known as selection bias. Everyone on the committee,
I knew there was a word for it.
there is,
Thank you.
and it applies to surveys when you ask people for opinions as well. The people that respond have an opinion. If you ask an unbiased person whether or not they, to respond and they have no opinion, you're not going to get them to offer one up. So you have to be cognizant of that. And it's really interesting. It really does flow back to the concept of a red team. You almost need to bring in, someone else or some other small group of people to really test, the primary sitting committee on their decisions, on their process along the way. I think, just speaking half comically, I think some people view capital budget as the red team. But
You're kind of right.
look, I think functionally, to some degree, that's the role we serve. But it's also our job to find ways to get to yes.
Right.
So we're a little bit conflicted playing, just completely unrestricted red team. And I'll also say, frankly, that when special committees get formed, they generally instinctively, knowing that it's going to be a difficult conversation, don't want to come to capital budget until their project's fully baked and they have an ask. And at that point, it's way too late.
Right.
It's just way too late. So, we gently try to get people to engage with us early. It's very hard to do because they know it's not an easy conversation.
Well, that could be a process improvement we could consider in terms of, for example, fields and courts. Let's move away from town hall. Fields and courts.
Okay.
It's just an example.
Just an example where we have a field study that came out. There's a variety of options. They're all relatively expensive, ranging from 3 to 13 million of the different parcels of land out there. A few weeks ago when we were discussing it, members of the select board said, well, let's form a committee to study fields and courts. And so that's one option out there. We'll see where that lands. But one option could be that before we go in the quote advocacy direction, we go to capital budget and say, hey, here are different options. What do you think? What say you? In the context of all the other capital needs, as we're trying to get feedback from the rec commission and open space and all the different pieces, because I do feel like on the select board level, that is missing from the outset. And I don't want to say it's like an auditor function that's missing, but and this is my hope for this project, is that we do come up with, whether it's a process or some other improvements, to help as we go through whatever the issue is, whether it's a new public safety building, the school facilities committee, all these things looming out there. A good process for how to vet these projects in a way that I think addresses some of what we're all grappling with right now. And so it could be that we involve capital earlier, even though it's not, a field is technically capital. So is a court.
Right.
Most of what we're talking about, with the exception of maybe the operating budgets, which I think are a whole
Anything that
separate.
isn't salary
Yeah,
or
anything that
copier
isn't
paper
salary.
is essentially capital.
Right.
So
Yeah.
Pretty much.
The only thing I'd add to all of this is that if you have a red team, it presupposes that there's expertise on the capital budget committee for every possible issue in town, which is highly improbable.
Yeah.
So it is a problem of expertise as well, right? So that even though I think the capital budget committee would probably be one possible source for doing the red team, I would think even the capital budget committee would say, we need some expertise in this topic, right? We're not fully omniscient about all this stuff. So-
Right, but the capital budget committee would have at least the sense to say, we need some help on
Well,
this.
that's right.
They would recognize that.
There's also the issue of, we have a hard enough time filling the committees we have, saying, how'd you like to take this profoundly negative approach to a popular project and criticize the work of people of goodwill who've identified this? That may appeal to some people. But but I conceptually, I think I was just responding to Brian and Ralph's points about, where, in the process, somebody decides, some group, often the select board, makes a decision that this is a thing that needs to happen. These courts are lousy, this building is falling down, these school classrooms are too small. And, it's really at that, I don't want to get into we're pretty deep in the what ifs, but there's the issue. And then, but if it gets far enough down a path where there's been a certain amount of consensus about this is a thing that needs to be done and resources put into it. Stopping and pivoting is a good way to leave a lot of money on the table and not solve a problem that's only going to get worse. So, but Mike has a slide deck that he sent around with capital building with what's it called?
Generational.
Infrastructure needs. I don't know that we're going to get to that tonight. I have some thoughts about that.
Right.
But there's some things on there that clearly could be dealt with better because they're entirely incoherent.
Right.
It refers it even puts numbers on a school project that isn't a thing yet,
Right.
or a public safety building isn't a thing yet, and those are opportunities to do it differently and better.
Right.
So, but go on.
I was just going to say one thing, is that we would like to tap some of the expertise in the town, which is all over the place, but does not want to come to meetings every Monday night or every Tuesday night. So if there is a short-term red team, if you want to call it that, piece of expertise we need, a lot of people would sign up for that because in fact, it would not be this long-term commitment, which actually a committee is, right? So it's tapping that group, but also realizing that group is probably hard to get unless they can have a reasonably constrained timeframe associated.
Focused.
Yeah, focused.
Right. So to Rob's point, Michelle put together, and I critiqued it and we massaged it, put together a list of potential projects, which we can actually take a look at. We do have other items here on our agenda, but I think it's a useful exercise at this point for us to take a look at that list. So if everyone agrees, and we do want to stop at 9, we want to use 2 hours of our time and move on. So thinking that this is a good use of our time right now and we can bring that along. Are there any comments from the public?
No.
Chris, do you have any comments? And are you up for taking a look at our list?
Yeah, I've been watching this and following along, and I think it was a really good conversation. I think one of the challenges when you get to some big municipal projects is that people don't necessarily want to pay for them, right? Because they don't perceive they necessarily use them, and whether that's water or sewer, I mean that's the classic, right? Nobody looks at it. Nobody cares about water and sewer until you don't have water and you can't flush your toilet, right? And then what happens is that they sit on the ground for decades, and then they all get fixed at once because, like what happened to Cohasset, was a nightmare, and you don't want that to happen, and you have to plan to pay. no, sewers isn't sexy, but God, if you can't flush your toilet. And the same goes for other public facilities. Obviously, things have changed a lot. I mean, the function of rooms in town hall have changed dramatically. I mean, 20 plus years ago, the treasurer collector was sorting through, those big sleeves of checks. Haven't done that for years, right? That's all being processed outside now. So the role of the treasurer collector's office has changed dramatically. Now they're just doing the far more complicated things online and transactional stuff. And so you have to be adaptable again, but no, that's not sexy. One of the things that's also very hard is planning these. And the problem is, one of the reasons that this conversation is happening now is Cohasset is not alone. Most communities don't schedule these on a regular basis, right? Oh, it's 10 years, we do our public safety, 10 years we'll do town hall, 10 years we'll do the next school. People don't do that. They do it. They have this big, I mean, most of you were involved in the big school battles 20 plus years ago, right? Music Circus. And then you don't want to go back and do that again. And but at the time, there should have been a plan for 30, for major renovations. Like when the senior center got acquired, and that was a challenge enough, we put together a plan for renovations over the next decade. Now, that's not the first 10, we're about 7 years into that now. So, we're going to have to, continue to plan for renovations of pieces to keep the building in good shape. Cohasset, like most communities, didn't do that for a long time. And rightly, people say, well, that should have been done. Well, it's true, but we can't go back 20 years ago and fix that boiler or make a different decision, unfortunately. So, the conversations you're having now are the kind of conversations the committee has to have, and then you have to get to a decision point, right? That's the other thing that's part of this. A decision has to be made because repeatedly people just say, well, it's too tough, or we're going to put it off. I mean, that's a decision, and it costs money, and it sometimes costs opportunity. And I don't know how you build that in though. I mean, I've been through this with these same conversations with other communities and also with private sector organizations, right? That how do you build, how do you plan, how do you do that? So you've really done a great job of laying these issues on the table. And I think you've also identified some things that Cohasset does pretty well. I mean, I think the capital budget team has been, we'll call it the red team because that's what Rob's calling it here. But red teaming these things has helped get better projects. And coming in early has been effective for that. Unfortunately, the town is looking at 3 or 4 big things, and the question is going to be, what do you do to make that work? And that's going to be a little hard question to answer. But that said, the work that's done now will help, I think, for a while. I mean, we're working off stuff that got done 10 years ago that got us a long way. So these conversations are going to mature this to the next level, which hopefully will suit the town for another couple of decades.
Great, thank you. So Justin, let's put up our list. That's the infrastructure PowerPoint. Justin, next time we want you to bring music to play while we're waiting for the screen to change. And no, the Jeopardy theme won't do.
Do karaoke.
I don't know. Be careful what you wish for, right? Okay, so these are the categories that Michelle has put together and Chris, right? Town buildings, utilities, water and sewer, electrical. I don't know if you want to talk about the brick grant.
Yep, so we received news that we weren't awarded the brick grant for this time around. However, there is another cycle next year that we could apply for if we feel as though we have a better argument to make for the community.
Right, so to be more, to provide more explanation, we included electrical when we thought that the AEC's idea for a microgrid might need town funding. At this point, it's off the table, so we're going to take it off of our list for now. Okay, transportation, which is primarily our roadways. Climate change is a new category we've added. Looking at stormwater, looking at more frequent and more powerful storms that affect the town. Harbor, Parks and Rec, and then information technology. So next slide, please. These numbers are, call them rumors, call them hearsay. These are numbers that we've heard. We have no formal information to go on, but we do know that these projects are out there. These are potential costs.
Can I say something about that?
Yeah.
This is obviously an eye-catching slide. I think this slide should be removed from the deck. It should be expunged from the public record. It should be destroyed in ways that violate the open meeting law. Once you create a document with a number on it, that number takes on some sort of a life. And if that was taken, and I know I've heard the same rumors, I've heard the same discussion, but when I see a document that says school project, of which there is none, 120 to 175 million dollars, which, okay, that's several years of town revenue, and not accounting for MSBA, not accounting for time frame. I would have been happier if those numbers were blanks or question marks, because this thing now all of a sudden, I'm concerned that this conversation about priorities is balancing against future numbers that are no better than guesses. And we're going to start talking about creating, even if we're just creating a rubric that's going to support $175 million high school 7 years from now. And we're going to distort town finances against that with all the other inputs, particularly whether the MSBA would support some or any of that. I don't know. I saw it. I kind of had obviously a certain reaction. I was kidding about the violations of law part, since we are actually on the record, but I am concerned that, these are the projects that are being talked about, but boy, they should have at least a warning label on it that says all numbers are wildly speculative, which they are, and everybody admits it. It's not a criticism. It's just the point I'm trying to make is that once you put a number on a piece of paper, that number takes on a life of its own. So, just a thought.
The only number that I think probably falls outside of that category, Rob, is town hall. We
I
did
know,
have a Vertex come in. And,
Your Vertex is in, and also that's a real project.
Yeah,
That's,
Right.
that's the one that's
yeah,
on the tracks. It's the one that's been in front of town meeting in pieces. No, I completely agree with
Yeah.
that. And I
think-
amend all of my prior sputtering outrage, measured comments to test for that. But these are, I think that said, these are the right projects to be looking down the road at. Are there more?
Well-
And are there road project? Well, we're just talking about buildings.
So
So,
it just.
I'm sorry,
That's okay. I just want to say the small town buildings, those are actually accurate numbers provided to us by building assessments that we had completed
I
for
assumed
the,
they were, given the precision. $73,000
Yes.
is a lot different than a range of 50 million.
Right, yes,
those are accurate.
yeah.
yeah, there's one other building I can think of that's in the 10-year capital plan. My computer's over there charging, by the way, right? Pull it up and confirm. But, and that is, I think I think it may even be in 2024, fiscal 24, the DPW has a townwide vehicle wash bay and repair facility. On the, it's on the request list. I'm not,
is that the RTF buildings? Is
no,
that what that's something separate. Okay,
and that is separate. That's literally recycling.
okay,
So they want to build an in-house wash and repair.
Correct.
okay.
And I think it's to the tune of $400,000 or $500,000.
Banging around in the back of this.
Yeah.
In terms of these, and she's back in the room because it might be a question she can answer, is I understand that there was a change to, but not the elimination of, the low-income, high-density affordable housing requirement for towns containing MBTA stations.
Yeah, the new DHCD rules.
And that did not go down by much, at least the report I heard, in the morning on the radio. And it requires certain not inconsiderable quantity of acreage. I talked about this with Chris. Acreage which Cohasset may not have. And all of a sudden, some of these building projects are going to be competing for space in which to be built. Just, did you hear anything about that, Michelle?
I'm sorry, I just stepped out.
The
40B, well, it's not
It's not
40B.
really 40B, it's the
low income.
transportation
Overlays,
community,
Yeah.
right?
something.
That,
That you need like 500 affordable units next to the MBTA, is that what we're
Something
talking
like
about?
that.
Right.
Something of
We
that
should-
nature?
I should stop bringing up things I don't know the answer to, but
I also don't know
that's
the
going to
answer
be
to
that's going to be, if it happens, it's going to be a big deal. And it's going to be a big deal,
It
not
is.
least of which, because it literally, I believe, requires specific acreage to be set aside for the development of certain kinds of housing. I'm a big believer in creating affordable housing for whatever that means in a community like this, but still. But boy, if you don't have the land to build it on, it's going to be complicated. But I'm sorry, that's background.
No, there's another issue around this. So this was just on my handwritten notes of things I wanted to bring up today, which is, if in fact we pick up 400 or 500 units of housing, we may be picking up a significant number of kids as well in the school system. So this can actually, it's important to think about and generally speaking, know where the town is going with regards to these units, because it impacts what you build for a school. There's no point, in designing and building a school for our current population forecast if it's going to change material, change material.
Absolutely. And to Mike's point, his agenda contains fact gathering. That's a
Right, it's a big
That's a
fact.
combination of a school committee problem
Right,
and a town staff problem. An interesting data point would be, what was the uptick in student enrollment when they built Avalon? Which
Right.
was,
It was a lot less than we
because
projected.
remember the
Yeah.
debates
Yeah.
around that time where that
Yeah.
this was going to be some cataclysm of students, and it really wasn't.
it really wasn't.
And we definitely need to learn more and read more about those final zoning rules, but I helped edit the letter that went to DHCD from Cohasset, and from what I recall, the punishment for not doing the zoning district in the way that would enable all of this multifamily housing is that we could not apply for state grants.
With a limited kind of state grants.
Certain types of state grants, you lose eligibility from MassWorks, Housing Choice Initiative, or local capital project funds, and I'm looking at DHCD's website. And so that we may be in a situation where we're just choosing not to get those grants because we don't want 400 multifamily houses
Right.
to be built.
What, can you repeat that list of grants that we would,
MassWorks program, Housing Choice Initiative, or local capital projects fund. And again, just reading from the
We-
press release that
We
came out.
would want, we're way ahead of ourselves. But
Yeah, yeah,
obviously,
yeah.
we want to look and see what those grant
do,
programs are,
right, do
and
we
how
even,
much money
do
have
we
we
tap
got.
those? What does it mean to us? MassWorks, we do.
Yeah, so that would be part of the calculus if we're assuming we're going to get state grants in the future to defray, for example, maybe some of the, grants we're accustomed to right now. It just may not happen because of
Okay.
the DHCD guidelines. But anyway,
Okay, so in terms of
we move on.
information gathering, we need to put that on our list.
Absolutely.
What grants do, these grant programs that we potentially lose? Okay. Versus building the units and taking the people into the community. Okay.
and one more time, can you give me the 3 grant areas?
I think we should just confirm the DHCD final zoning rules and just read them
Okay.
just to make sure the law is
Okay.
as it appears to be.
And just to be clear, Gene, we just have to provide the zoning. We don't actually have to provide the units. Is that correct?
it's like an overlay district where we allow developers to build, but there is a significant cost associated with that on our staff time in terms of essentially doing the diligence to determine the parcels that can be built on, which typically developers do.
Yeah.
Town staff doesn't do, and so still working through all of that to figure out what exactly these new laws require, because DHCD is rolling out webinars on September 8th to explain the guidelines, et
Okay.
cetera.
To explain what they just dropped on us.
Yeah.
26-story East German style poured concrete apartment block.
We've only got an acre, then
Yeah, that's where it's going. It's
that's
going
where
up.
it's going.
Yeah.
It's going up.
Meet Marcel Breuer, you know, that's what you're getting.
All right, on Rob's comment, I'd just like to get the sense of the group here and you, Chris, on whether we should be taking out anything off this list. Well, let me rephrase that.
Yeah,
I think we should
I was
leave the items-
exaggerating for effect to some extent, but go ahead.
Okay, so,
I would say Rob's comments are well taken with police and fire. I mean, that's just sort of a wild guess.
These are wild guess numbers.
I would say
Yeah.
like question mark there. And with schools too, I mean, this is hearsay, but I heard the lower end could be 75 for a renovation.
For reno, right?
It just depends on where we land with all of that.
Yep.
And MBSA will know,
MSBA,
MSBA will
Yeah.
know by September.
yes
maybe?
and no.
No.
It's
Yeah.
it's a
They
complicated
backed up
process.
pretty,
They
so
are.
I've been tracking their meetings that they're holding, and they're still looking at towns that submitted last round.
Okay, fine.
So I was surprised to see that when I was looking at their meetings.
So it's
tomorrow.
September of 24.
No, we're supposed to hear September 22 if we're
Right.
accepted into their program.
Okay.
But I noticed that even their last meeting, they were still talking about the accelerated program pieces from the last time around.
I would commend to anybody in this table, any of our committees, or in town. I had sent a link to the advisory committee. John Lemieux did a presentation to, might have been the school committee, might have been I think it was the school committee,
Mhm.
but John Lemieux is Vertex. And he explained the MSBA process, and full disclosure, I work with John
Mhm.
professionally with other communities that we represent. Happy to say, I think very highly of him in his judgment, but his explanation of it was really clear. So I have that link. I'll
Great.
kick it around to our group.
we'll add it to our minutes
Sure.
and
That's a good
it'll be
idea.
posted onto the SharePoint.
But he did maybe 20 minutes, but he talked about the things you were talking about, like their timing, their practices, how things really work, what they're really looking for. Really good insight into the whole process. So
Okay.
All right, so the question is, do we want to have guesswork in this document or not?
Well, in terms of just adding the language to make it clear that
We
this-
could do that as
Okay.
well. And
I mean, if you want to
and-
put a disclaimer on it, I think that's fine. There are question marks next to the numbers where they are guesses.
Yeah.
There are not question marks next to the numbers that are,
Confident.
more real. But there's nothing that screams off of this page that would stop you from embracing the whole thing as some sort of reality.
Yeah,
I-
okay.
I think the bigger, I mean, it's a dangerous thing to say, but when you add this all up, you realize the magnitude of the issue of what we're dealing with. And I think that's the key message. It's not any particular number on this page. The problem is we have, committees that form or groups that have a view on a specific project. And, in a vacuum, it seems rational, right? Or at least to them. But when you put it all up on a page like this, you say, wow, I can see $250 million here,
Mhm.
right? And that's when you realize that not all this stuff is going to happen exactly the way everybody wants to happen with sort of the full freight projects that they would like to see happen. I mean, it's not feasible.
I
So
think so.
that to me is the big takeaway. And that's why prioritization matters. That's why being reasonable with regards to what we can actually afford and budgeting is important.
I agree with Brian. I also think, and this may be going back half an hour, but part of the accounting, and this is for every project that has a building that's currently standing, is backing out the retro, there's a cost of, the cost of doing nothing,
Yeah.
the schools are the cost of doing nothing, town hall certainly is a cost of doing nothing. Police and fire, there are, it's perhaps less immediate, but everybody's, who thinks about it knows it has to be dealt with. But there is, there's a non-zero number attached to the alternative of even.
Yeah.
Yeah, so.
Which raises the stakes actually in going down the path and proposing a project that fails. Honestly, I mean, it raises the stakes to actually being reasonable along the way and making sure that by the time, it goes to town meeting, people can look at the number and get their head around it and say yes.
That's especially important with an MSBA funded project, but I'll let John Lemieux's comments do that. I'd only be echoing what I heard from him.
Yeah. I mean, I think a red team is a great way to rein in some of this. I think putting budget constraints on projects is a great way to do. We tend to hire the experts and then take their recommendations. And they're experts, but there tends to be what I would personally refer to as a trip to Marshall's effect, where you go in, looking for one specific thing and you come out with an entire cart full of stuff that you didn't know you needed.
Right.
And sure enough, a week later, it's still sitting in bags in your house and because you didn't need it. And so there's a little bit of that when we hire our consultants and say, well, tell us what you think.
That's more like Target for me.
Well, whatever it is. I mean, everyone's got their demons, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think that it's funny. I wonder if we all would have had different reactions if we started the PowerPoints with what's our debt capacity?
Right.
Right, in terms of,
Right.
particularly as we escalate over the years, this is in the back of my mind, and I will feel a lot better once I know the answer to this question, which I hope, and I know that we're going to get there, Mike, which is if, for example, interest rates continue to escalate, what really should we sort of qualify ourselves for, right? Like, one of my pet peeves, this is just from my professional career, is when, you watch on TV, someone saying, well, you're qualified up to $400,000 to buy the house.
Doesn't mean it's smart.
Even though your DTI is like 66%. And it's like, no, but you should really buy the $250,000 house because
That's what you can afford.
That's what you really can afford without like being on the edge constantly. And so a part of what I'm trying to figure out is looking at these big numbers, where is our debt capacity at the end of the day? And I've spoken with some other folks who I think feel similarly in terms of if, for example, we start to do all these projects, depending on the sequencing, does that mean, for example, and I'm just going to use this as an example, we do town hall and schools, that means police and fire off the table because we're tapped out. We've spent too much at that point. In order to address our police and fire needs. And how does that fit in and where does the math go there? That to me is sort of a critical side of the other side of the ledger.
And in some of the earlier iterations of our framework, our foundation, as we began to form this committee, didn't make it into this particular PowerPoint, but one of the considerations is if we accept one project, how does that affect other projects? Does that eliminate them or not? And that needs to go into our decision-making as collective decision-making, select board, capital budget, and advisory.
At one point, Hingham was talking about maybe dipping down from their AAA rating to do a big project, a big school project. And a lot of people ultimately said, no, absolutely not. And it didn't go through. And they're probably happy about that as they face similar generational projects, but they still have their AAA rating and they didn't, jeopardize that. But anyway, I don't want to go into that rabbit hole. I do think it's an important one though, as we look at that slide.
Right. Okay, so that's only town buildings. Let's look at the additional categories. So Justin, next slide, please. Okay, water treatment, the granulated activated charcoal now is at 5.8 million, rounded to 6. There are a number of drivers behind that. I am going to be attending as the Capital Budget Committee liaison to water. There's a meeting, I believe, coming up on the 23rd, if I'm not mistaken. Where I'll hear more, but my memory is that we changed consultants, we changed vendors to a group called Tetra Tech. So the previous vendor said 3.4 million, which is what Water Department came to town meeting with. Tetra Tech says, oh, no, 3.4 is way too low. You're going to need 5.8. Part of the, or most of what they pointed to was inflation and COVID-driven costs. Brian is very skeptical on that statement, and Brian will be attending with me this water department meeting where we can actually get deeper into it. But be that as it may, for whatever reason, we're at 5.8. We also have the Elms Meadow well field, and that is now offline. And the reason is that the testing for PFAS has actually come up to a level that's, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, anybody, above our federal limits. And so we're not even pumping water from there anymore. A question would be, would it be cost effective in some way to the town to actually provide treatment for that water? Be that as it may, it's on there, as well as costs for improvements or maintenance on our distribution systems, our tanks, the pump station that's sending water to Hingham, the reservoir, the Bound Brook Dam. I'm not sure why that's on the list, because I thought we just rebuilt that, but I'm not, whatever, it's on there. Then the wastewater treatment plant, discussion on intrusion and infiltration. Water, both fresh and salt, that get into the system on either big stormwater events or extra high tides, which would be salt water, overtopping the manholes and that water going into our treatment plant. We know that we have to replace membrane filters at a high price tag. That is, in my mind, not negotiable. It's got to be done. So all of these costs need to be factored in. Questions, comments?
Just a question on the membranes. I thought we did the membranes a couple of years ago. We're a few years into their life at this point. Is
Yes.
that okay? So that you're just noting that that's a recurring
Yes.
cost.
They recommend replacement every 12 to 15 years.
Okay, and we're about what, 3 or 4 years in?
I think only 2 years in.
Okay.
Yeah.
Brand
Yeah.
Very new.
Yeah.
So
And there's a wild card out there on sewer, which is regional sewer, i.e. with Situate and Hull, which it's very unclear to me, even if we decide to do it, which is a huge if, what the cost ultimately will be. There will certainly be a cost to us in terms of wear and tear on our plant for sure, as we squeeze the capacity tighter and tighter on that plant. If we let Situate pump more, which is the current proposal for Situate to pump more through us, and we do the excess out through Hull. It's just not clear, but I do want to put it out there that that's something that I know the sewer commission has been talking to Situate about. We've had one, if not two, select board members previously talking with Situate. We'll see what happens.
Okay, so I'm going to add that to the list.
Yeah,
Additional
I don't
sewer.
have any
As a
sense
bullet.
of price on that one.
Right. Other comments? Okay, good. Next one, please. All right, roadways, this is cost for our public roadways. Private ways are not included here. We just received the road survey, and off the top of my head, I can't tell you what the different breakdowns were, but there are 5 categories of roads. Those that are perfection, no need. Those that might need very minor like crack sealing and what have you. Routine maintenance to just keep the roads, which are in decent shape, up at $500,000 per mile. Minor rebuild, which takes the road surface down to a substrate, but not down to the dirt. And then major rebuild, which takes the roadway all the way down to the dirt, the gravel, and rebuilding up layer by layer. The road survey provides the number of miles for each of those categories. I don't want to go by memory as to how many for each, just I have noted them. We can certainly flesh out this slide with what the road survey is showing. And then sidewalks and fencing at $1 million per mile. We could lay out a list of those areas, those streets in town where sidewalks are proposed so that we can come up with a number. Sidewalks and fencing.
So Mike, just a quick update there. We did go back to the consultant to ask them for what a sidewalk survey would cost, like we got for the roads. They quoted us $47,000. And so we're not pursuing that right now. And we asked Chris and Michelle to work with Brian Joyce to frankly do that work on our own to survey the sidewalks we had and essentially come up with some sense of a proposal with respect to sidewalks that need to be repaired, if not completely redone. Because I think the ultimate goal, at least for the select board, is to have a road and sidewalk paving schedule. So if we're doing a road, we should consider the sidewalk as we go, right? Let's try to do the work as we go. And so we're trying to get there, but we're not there yet on numbers.
So we still need a number for the amount of sidewalk times $1 million per mile.
Yeah.
Questions or comments?
Just a comment. Again, we're putting a number up here. Nobody's dialed in, but we are putting out in a public forum. These numbers are a multiple of what's in the current 10-year capital request list or forecast or whatever you want to call it. So I just want people to understand these are not in any way, the plan that we put in place, whatever it was about 4 years ago in terms of funding per mile. And it's a massive difference.
So it's, in your view, it's underfunded in the current 5 and 10 year plan?
If it turns out that these numbers are correct, and these are consultants' numbers, okay, they may or may not be correct in terms of what we're about to experience when we enter into our next contract for the next several years. But if it turns out these are correct, you're looking at, you're looking at going from, $500,000 a year to $2 million a year in terms of spend. So right now, what's in the 10-year capital request forecast, okay, is very clear. It's a 20-year road replacement program, and it's estimated at about between $500,000 and $600,000 total per year, which is somewhere between $250,000 and $300,000 per mile. It's 2 miles a year, okay? And of that money, 300 of it is allocated from capital each year automatically. And then there are the Chapter 90 funds, which bounce around anywhere from 175 to 225 in a year, which gets us up around that 500 number-ish. And the idea was once we got a few years into execution on the plan, we could fine tune the capital appropriation just to make sure that DPW could continue to, to track with whatever the actual cost was based on, and where Chapter 90 was coming in. So we're kind of due for the tune-up right now, which we were thinking was going to be maybe, anywhere between $0 and $100,000. And it sounds like, we're going to be possibly tearing up the entire plan.
mean, there is a bright side, Brian.
which is,
If this is consuming 100% of the capital budget, your committee's meetings will be very short.
they will be very short.
No
yes.
other decisions to make.
Yes, there will be a lot of very upset departments across town. but, yeah. So anyway, and I don't want to pick on DPW. I mean, we're having, you know, we're seeing step function. Well, we're seeing discussions that are contemplating step function changes in cost, whether it be, you know, the GAC system, whether it be the roads. And, you know, Michael expressed that I'm feeling some skepticism. What I feel like I'm seeing out in the marketplace right now is, you know, everyone hears inflation, and, you know, vendors are seeing it as, COVID, supply chain, vendors are seeing it as an opportunity to quote whatever they want. We saw this on the rooftop air handlers up at the schools.
Yeah.
You know, we quoted those, we appropriated for them. They came in at what, 200% of plus what they should have, simply because we had slipped into COVID and all of a sudden just the pricing environment has changed. So I think we need to be very, and to Rob's point, there's a cost to doing nothing. It's not like we should just go dark on this stuff, but to some degree, my instincts are starting to tell me, you know, wait a minute, we should let this pricing environment settle out. You know, the cure to high prices is high prices. People stop buying and the prices come back down. It's just economics 101. So I just put that out there. My instinct is that these numbers are far higher than what it's actually going to cost, based on what it has cost us in the past to redo our roads. And I think
These numbers are higher than you.
these numbers are higher. I'm hoping instinctively that time will show that the consultant's wrong, but they may not be.
Well, according to the road survey that they just did, if we were to do everything today, which is not envisioned by the survey, right?
Right.
It's over 10, 20 years, it'd be 25 million based on all the various levels of our roads and maintenance or lack thereof. And I think
Based on today's conditions.
based on today's conditions.
Right.
And the question I have is, that's obviously not going to be like the same amount every year, right? You're going to have some ups and
Well,
downs.
the roads
So how do you
the
manage
roads that require almost nothing right now because
Yeah.
they're brand new, within 20 years will need replaced.
That's true,
They
too.
drop down.
They'll
So
be coming
yeah,
on.
that's just
Yeah.
a snapshot.
Yeah.
I would say you'd probably have to, if I remember the differentiation in there, it was under 10 miles for each of these categories. And I think we only had about 40 miles of road. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I think we need to move along. We only have
Yeah.
about 10 minutes.
Yeah, there's more work that needs to be
Yeah.
done on this, and there's more work that needs to be done on the GAC before we just accept the numbers. Let's put it that way. That's the point I wanted to make. But we're seeing some weirdness in the quoting and pricing environment
Right.
right
I'm
now.
sorry, Brian, GAC is,
The charcoal filtration
oh,
system
right, that.
for the
I was
water
thinking-
treatment plant.
I was thinking in terms of roads.
Yeah, that went
Never
from
mind.
the doubled in cost.
Yeah, I
because-
thought it was a road component
No,
I'd
no.
never heard of before. I'm sorry, go ahead.
All right, let's try and spend a couple of minutes on each of the next slides. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please. This is changes that have been brought to the town planner.
You're off.
Thank you for coming by, Ralph,
Thanks for asking.
and you'll be invited to the next as well. The town planner has told us that the town doesn't have resources for us to pursue federal grant money that's earmarked for these kinds of projects for climate change resiliency. But I've included them. We don't have pricing on them at this point, but they are in our future if we want to get ahead of stormwater impact from more frequent, more powerful storms. Let's move on.
Well, and we do have, the select board is likely to have agenda item of resiliency coming up because
Yeah.
we're spending money to hire someone to do resiliency planning, i.e. Woods Hole, so we can certainly consider adding that in. I don't
Right.
see a problem with that.
Just that we're facing a time
Yeah, I know.
Deadline
time
of
limited
October.
grant. Okay.
to get the grant applications in. On the harbor, the Elm Street corridor, I'm just putting TBD on the share for that.
Update there, Ford Act did not go through. So the money that was in there, the 550,000 for Elm Street is not happening, not at least within this year.
Okay. The boat ramp is already allocated, I believe, as is the government island rehabilitation. Big questions are seawalls. Those are the town-owned seawalls, what to do with those, and whether the federal breakwater will require town participation. So it's on the list. Next one, please. And we have the courts, fields and courts at 10.5 million. So on the question of a rumor town common rehabilitation, I'm not sure if we have any more information on proposals there.
What is that?
There's a group in town that would like the town common to be rehab.
In what way?
Better green space, yeah.
A massive private donation could make it happen with naming opportunities.
Right.
Also, since we're on TV, you know, there are towns that have town halls with family names on them.
Right.
Just saying.
So the Rob Hillman Cohasset Town Common.
That went out the window when the Powerball ticket was collected in Illinois and not in
Right.
Weymouth. I'd bought you a town
Hingham's
hall.
putting in place a naming bylaw,
There you
just
go.
saying.
And then one
Can I
last
ask a-
slide.
Can I go, a very quick question,
Yeah,
Gene?
So Chris donated to the senior center?
Yes. Chris Senior has donated the senior center.
That's good.
Right.
I, just before we leave, I have a quick question about that court study.
Oh, okay, sure.
Offline.
Yeah, yeah.
Go ahead. Mike.
Okay. And then finally, IT, we just funded 550,000 to do an upgrade on our backbone. But talking with Ron Menard, these are spends that we could see in the near future, about $1 million. So that's on the list.
There might be a wireless tower too in our future.
Yes,
Town-owned?
Possibly.
Unclear.
right, unclear.
Still
Possible.
thinking through it, right? In terms of thinking about a cell tower
Oh, yes.
near Jerusalem to increase,
Yes.
enhance, provide the coverage in the
Those
first
generally an
instance.
income generator?
It would be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Uh,
Build a
there's-
tower and hang things,
There's
they
some
pay to hang
red
things
tape we
on.
have to cut
Yeah,
through there.
sorry, I don't mean to,
No,
but it, you know,
No,
for
it'll be
completeness and full
great.
disclosure.
Right.
we're working towards the goal.
So we've tried to include everything we can think of to make a comprehensive list for potential spends, and this is what we've now delivered. So at this point, we've just got a few minutes left to talk about where do we want to go from here? We have the very important point of what is our debt load? What kind of debt load could we take on? How much can we afford? How much should we afford? And I think that's something we need from, if not the town manager's office, a new finance director.
So I spoke to Don today while he was in.
Yeah,
Oh,
okay.
sorry, Chris. I spoke to Don today while he was in, and he asked us to come up with a list of exactly what we're looking for. And he's happy to pull the data, provide a one-page spreadsheet for us to help us guide us in the next meeting.
All right, so I would ask Rob and Brian, who I think of as our two best SMEs on this, to perhaps draft a request to Don Pyatt. Do you agree that we could ask?
Yes, although I
Brian
think we should get to.
Do you agree
next-
that the guys across the table should do the following? That's a
Yeah.
great question.
Next steps from like a procedural standpoint too with the select board on August 23rd. We can discuss that in a second then.
Right,
I have no issues with Brian and Rob doing work.
but are they the best people to do it?
Thank you, Jim.
That's- Yeah, they can do it, but are they the right people to do it? Are they the best people?
I think so, yeah, and I think Mike Barclay too would probably
Okay.
provide some
Yeah, I wanna-
helpful
I wanna
input.
loop
Maybe
back with
Rob,
Mike.
if you want to
Yeah.
delegate
Yeah.
your task to Mike.
I'd like to loop back with Mike on
I know
this.
he has a good perspective.
He's an incredible talent.
Can I ask a question? So as far as coming up with what our debt capacity is and so on and so forth, should we first identify the projects that we believe are priorities prior to that? Because are we just going to back into a dollar amount, or are we going to prioritize project based on need versus based on dollars? I guess is my big question. Because if we're saying, we've showed that slide and we have the schools at a rumored number, and you have town hall, and you have,
Not to throw us off the track, we haven't heard from the schools yet on their other capital needs.
Right.
We're just sort of saying, oh, new schools.
yeah,
Well, they may well have other major capital expenditures that relate to curriculum, may relate to contracts. That's not capital, I grant you that, but,
No, but it's the biggest single item in the town budget.
right,
So you're absolutely right. I made my point about this at our last meeting.
Yeah.
Labor cost is the biggest cost.
right.
So. we
And the
can't-
impact it has on our operating budget.
Absolutely.
So those are all cogs in the machine that we're trying to define here.
I was going to suggest that any committee that failed to attend this meeting would have its capital request deferred indefinitely, but that might be a little aggressive.
Right.
I think it would be helpful to talk about next steps, because I know August 23rd, I'm going to go back to the select board, and they're going to want to charge a formal committee, at least some members will, and I'm curious as to input from you all in terms of how to continue this. You know, one option is to continue this group, and we'll just make it a formal committee and put together a
I
charge.
think to Ralph's point is that, you know, in the context that we shouldn't be delaying this unduly, you know, speed is the enemy of a number of different things. And that if the select board, you know, I think they could be advised to, you know, take Ralph's advice or perhaps just chill out a little bit. But, you know, a couple of more, I get the feeling in a couple of more meetings, maybe with a couple of more people at the table and also looking at what other towns have done to give ourselves some options. Your question didn't get answered, and it's a really good one, which is how are we going to, you know, are we going to look at the available stream of money and then decide what we're going to spend it on? Are we going to decide what the spends are in priority? I think that they're almost questions that I can't quite figure out whether I think they ought to be, you know, in silos and then you compare them, but they're too closely related to not, you have to hold both thoughts in your head at the same time. And I think that's really where this committee comes from. I know from comments that Brian has made over the last, you know, in committees, years, and some conversations we've had, and John Chapman and some other folks, that having the numbers available to what's the absolute upper limit of what could conceivably be spent, and what is another expression, the pain point for taxpayers at those numbers,
Right.
and then to work those priorities into them. So like, you know, town hall, you know, Russ Benetti were here, he'd be telling us possibly, maybe, kind of, maybe certainly, you know, that there's a big number from his group, et cetera. So there are, you know, so the numbers have some, but to your point is that, you know, I think we gather both of those pieces of data, and you've asked the best question. Okay, here's the money, here's what we're gonna do with it. You know, okay, go. And, you know, we cut cards to decide, you know, which
Yeah.
capital project we can build or something more sophisticated than that.
I was just gonna say, I think it's iterative. I don't
Yes.
I don't think you go down, I don't think one dictates. I think it bounces back and forth until you know, arrive at what you know, the best solution that you can actually afford. Now, how you define what you can afford, you know, is a variable, right? But the starting point to define it is what's our debt capacity in levy? And then, what do the tax bills look like as we layer on incremental tax burden? At some point you get, you start to look around the room and you're like, taxpayers, we'll do it. People will start looking at each other like taxpayers aren't going to take this. It'll instinctively come. But I think we need that data to go back and forth.
Yeah.
I mean, if the number said, we have $250 million, you'd say, okay, let's just go do all the projects, right? And the flip side is, if we work in the absence of a budget, you say, okay, let's go do all these projects, and the cost is $250 million, which is well, probably not going to happen. So you need, I think you need both, and
Yeah, if I had remembered the word iterative, I would have, my comments would have been a good deal, sort of, but.
triangulation. It's
No,
like
but precisely
what you
Brian's
like,
saying.
what you can afford, what you get. I don't know. It's
But it's like Gene's point,
Circular reference.
just because a mortgage company would have lent me a
Right.
ruinous amount of money when we were younger, didn't mean that it was a good
Right.
idea.
right,
to
or that
buy
you
it.
did it. Was there a hand?
Nope.
Oh, okay, sorry.
There's only,
We want to get to Chris.
Yeah.
Before we wrap. Chris, do you have thoughts?
I think there's a lot of conversation to be had. So, I think Michelle's point is really important from our perspective too. I mean, there are things that kind of, that go to basic functionality of government, right? You have to have a police headquarters to run this,
That's right.
and you have to have a water plant, and you have to have a sewer plant, and you have to
And
have some. So, I mean, that doesn't just, what they look like and how fancy they are is different. And again, and these aren't also, there's many permutations. We talked about regionalization, right? There's lots of ways of skinning cats. The CPC money can obviously fund historical renovations and fields. It cannot fund schools or
Right.
turf. There's so many different permutations on this. And that said, I think the most important thing is to say, well, these are things we really need to do first, with an understanding that things change, right? There's always, these aren't the 10 commandments. At the same time, it's going to be a lot easier for us to come back and say, here's how these things can play out, because different projects have different alternative funding sources. Some don't really have any. So I think that would help define the conversation a little bit better.
I just want to make a comment on what we were just talking about on the iterative process. Last time I talked about coming up with a minimum acceptable outcome or product. I think if we come up with a debt limit that would be our minimum, or I guess it would be in this case the maximum, that addresses that point, and then you go after that. Then you start asking questions about that and fine tuning it so that the next iteration of it, it's been adjusted to some level. One other thought I just had, and going to communication and Justin's efforts, I would suggest perhaps some sort of aggressive survey of the town, sending out some kind of townwide survey. One question might be, how much of a tax increase would you
We have to start having voting in this committee
Yeah.
before we do
Yeah.
something like that.
So no idea is off the table.
Yeah.
So I'll just
Okay.
put that
No,
out
you're right
there.
there.
Yep.
But that's a way to engage the community.
It
Is
is.
where I'm coming,
Yeah.
where I'm
It
going
is.
with this.
Yeah.
Is to have
Would you
some
pay
sort of,
more for?
yeah,
Yes.
to have some sort of
to get more, yeah.
Yeah,
a question that really grabs our citizens' attention.
yeah.
Leave it at that. It's just after 9:00.
Nice, Chris.
We have a select board meeting on the 23rd. Do you want any members of this committee to attend that? And then the next question is, when should we reconvene?
I think for the 23rd, I think the question that will probably be posed is, this group was supposed to come back with a recommendation for next steps.
Mhm.
For the select board then to, it sounds like some I'm not going to presuppose all want to charge a formal committee. And I think if people have thoughts on that, they absolutely should come. If, this sort of more informal subgroup or subcommittee is, I think, a productive process, we could do that. I think it could be worth talking through. From my personal perspective, I think that probably like a few more information gathering sessions would probably be productive. I could see one on the operational side, which we really haven't discussed
Right.
that much.
Right.
The debt capacity and new revenue topics, and then looking at other towns and benchmarks with respect to our demographic data, just so we can get a sense of,
Yep.
oh, either we're
Strongly-
like way out of
strongly
whack, or we're really, frankly, under revenuing. Okay, I'm just gonna say under taxing ourselves, comparatively speaking. And then I think, to your point, Mike, I do think that, and you just gotta be so careful with surveying, but surveying might be or some sort of outbound communications to address some of these, I don't want to say consumer education issues, but like this intangible we're struggling with might be worthwhile to just really think about too. And I'm struggling with what's the best forum to do it. Is it this continued group? Is it a more formal committee? I'm a little agnostic as long as it's seemingly working, but I want to make sure too that it is working.
Can I suggest this?
Yeah.
For the select board not vote a charge on the 23rd. If they want to kick around the notion of a charge or even send us a draft of a charge, I think that this group should participate in drafting the charge, or at least give a notice for a notice and comment period, if you will. So I think it would be, I think that knowing the 5 members of the board, that wouldn't be regarded, I think, as a big ask.
Yeah, no, I don't.
Yeah.
It was my hope that this group would help draft the charge that would then be
Even better.
recommended. And
Yeah, I've just never done that.
I'm just not sure we're there yet on drafting.
I don't think we
We
are.
are.
Yeah.
I agree. You said it first, you said it second, I'll say it. I completely agree. I mean, this is, right now, this is a discussion forum. And if you look at what happened tonight, it was a discussion.
Yeah.
It's functioning exactly the way it's supposed to function. We're getting our heads around the issues, the magnitude of the issues, and starting to gel, with regards to what we need to do to sort of attack the problem. I think, sitting down and forming a charge is a little premature.
I think you're right.
Saying, I think you guys are right. You said it before me.
I was gonna say, I agree with the
We're
fact
all
you agree. Thank you, Brian.
It feels early. At some point, this is going to come to a charge,
Yeah.
but right now it's a discussion. Everybody's invited.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. Chris, do you agree that it's too soon for this group to actually become a more formally charged committee?
I think that my better response is I think you're evolving into that point, and I don't think you're there yet, because I don't think you're ready as a group to make the recommendations that I think, based on what I'm hearing, you all want to make. You're not quite ready to define the group yet, I don't think so, or the charge of the group, I should say. So
Right.
It's evolving, which is the point of this whole conversation, right? Is to
Right.
get to a place where people say, yes, we're going in the right direction.
Right. And the timeline that we had discussed really was to try and have this group, if not, have this group reach some sort of conclusion by the end of the year, as opposed to trying to get something done ahead of fall town meeting. That's off the table completely. And to your point, Rob, speed can be the enemy of good decision-making,
Right.
or understanding from which you make decisions. So all this to say that perhaps we should come up with a timeline that we feel we can support and what those deliverables should be. Come up with a list of deliverables and then come up with a timeline to make those deliverables. That could be our next within our next meeting or meetings. And then the question is, when do we want to meet next? Any thoughts at all? And it is 10 past. 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks?
I don't think we want to let 3 or 4 weeks pass. It's my instinct. I mean,
Yeah.
Not more than 3.
I'm also aware it's the end of August. People may not be available, but I'd suggest, getting back in and continuing the discussion as soon as, Rob and I and Mike Barkley can work with Don to pull the finance materials.
It might not be a bad idea to break you up into smaller groups then, because, 2 weeks is a much, Classic disappears the end of August.
Yeah.
And then the following week is Labor Day. The following Monday is Labor Day.
Right.
So, it may not be a bad idea to have people break into small groups, and we can work with those groups small on an independent basis to generate facts.
I have just to move this forward, I have a suggestion. Why don't you, Brian, and Mike Barclay / Rob move forward on the debt capacity issues that you were going to chase down, acknowledging that people are going to be on vacation, et cetera. I can talk to Lance and Craig about trying to gather information on the school side, both on the operations and on capital needs to, do a projection moving forward. Mike, if you want to talk with Chris about that same on the town side, because I know you had already begun maybe those conversations on the operation and staffing.
Sure.
And the last sort of piece of the puzzle, and maybe we just leave it at this, but other towns and benchmarks. Mike, maybe you and I can talk about how best to chase that information down. The Hingham Sustainable Budget has some of that already in there.
Yeah.
It's great work.
We can move forward from there too. I know that they were researching other towns that had done similar projects.
So Chris, tomorrow I'll check in with Tracy to see when I can meet with you, and I assume with Michelle, that the three of us, is that right? Would that be good? Yeah.
Later in the week, or it becomes, we'll have to do it in kind of some hybrid form. Plus, Michelle's taking some very well-earned time off next week, at the end of next week.
Yeah,
That's well earned.
right. But not to push, but I'm certainly free this week. So, if that works for everyone's schedules.
Well, and maybe we can reconvene after Labor Day. I know that's far, but if we're working in the
No,
interim.
if we're working, and I would ask everyone who's working on a project to just feed me an update
Okay.
at the change of status. Think of it that way.
Okay.
When something changes, let me know, even if it's every 2 days.
Yep.
And I'll collect that information, I'll disseminate it back out. And Justin, it would be interesting to hear your thoughts on, out of the box, thinking outside the box, how can we provide news and information with the lack of a news channel? That's a real problem. That's one of our problem statements that I'm going to add to our list. And Chris, you can tell Justin to ignore Mike. He's not your boss. But just looking at this dispassionately in terms of what we come up with this week, it seems to me that you're the logical person to work that.
I hope so.
All right. Cool.
Thank you for-
He's not your boss, Justin, but that's okay.
We just tasked him with solving a fundamental social and political problem.
Right, but he's the guy to do it.
Chris has a capital budget button on his desk that says, he's not your boss. He's not
You're not the boss of me.
We're gonna take it to the red team. We're gonna take it to the red team.
Sit down with Chris and
Yeah.
figure some things out next
Right.
week. Absolutely.
Cool. Very good. Thank you.
So we're looking at the 12th? Monday the 12th.
September 12th.
That's the next Monday in sequence. That isn't Labor Day.
It's better than Labor Day.
Oh,
So that's a month out, but let's just keep working.
I will either be impaneling a jury that day, you will not see me, or I
All
will
right.
not be impaneling a
Okay.
jury that day, and I'll be here. So,
All right.
September 12th it is.
All right, good. And for myself, I'm going to just put more thoughts down in terms of keeping us organized and moving ahead.
So just a thought, I'm a little concerned that when you go to the select board next week and tell them our next meeting is September 12th, that's going to elicit some panic to accelerate everything.
I think the only real timing pressure
Yeah.
is town hall and fall meeting.
Yeah.
Last we were talking with Chris, it seemed like maybe we were looking at spring, and so we had more runway. But then we had a presentation by the Town Hall Building Committee, and you may know more, where it looks like they're trying to squeeze in something for fall, even though we may not have a final number yet. And I'm not sure if that's gonna fly, but that's the only, in my mind, the only real timing issue that's putting pressure on this group at all in terms
Right.
of.
And that raises the whole question of, even if it's premature, should there be a red team looking at the town hall project if they're trying to move it to fall town meeting?
Let me be perfectly clear about what I said earlier. I'll move it forward. I think the whole red team concept does not apply to town hall.
Okay,
That would have been something prior perhaps to the last town meeting vote or the last exclusion vote where the town hall project failed. And what was wrong with that project and or what happened to this project. It's part of that should be baked into the early middle stage of a project. At the end, it just becomes a reason to shoot down a project into which there's been a very significant investment, and the alternative of which is to be pouring money into a bad building. And to some extent that happened, but that's a conversation
all right,
Yeah.
before 9 o'clock sometime.
right. I don't want to keep us.
Yeah.
So,
Good?
why don't you
I think-
close the meeting? Oh, actually, Brian, you
Brian
need
needs
to
to
close.
close.
Oh, I need to close capital budget.
For which
So
you
actually,
lost
We don't have a
we've
quorum.
lost our quorum.
Right.
So are we permanently in session because we
are.
don't have a quorum to adjourn? Well, actually,
It's like Charlie on the MTA. You're-
Okay, in town meeting, if we
Ralph
lose, if
closed
we
it
lose a
by walking
quorum,
away.
so Ralph technically closed.
if we lose a quorum
Maybe.
by the end of the night, we still adjourn the
Okay,
meeting.
well, I'm still going to do a roll call vote with the motion. Can I entertain a motion to close the meeting?
I move we close the capital budget meeting.
I second the motion. Roll call vote. Ralph Dormitzer? Not present. Susan Franklin?
Now, President,
Francine Lyons? Michael?
adjourn.
No, Michael Dig?
Yes.
Aye.
Aye.
Brian Host? Aye. The meeting's adjourned. The time is 9:17.